din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și sfut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, слава полковей, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, слава ей, слава ей. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет.
Oh что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты найдешь наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein in der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Sretna pod słońcem, rasti u jaslama dzieci, rasti i cvjetaj zemljo radnih ljudi, i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Srce pita, rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srce pita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije простяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжается бой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is the evening of the 25th of August, 2025, and here we are with a live stream looking at the recent electoral defeat and disastrous defeat of the leftist party in Bolivia, traditionally associated with former President Evo Morales, the movement towards socialism. MAS, as it's known by its acronym. And we're going to be looking at that today and why that defeat has come about and what lessons can be learned from it. And then we'll take some questions from you, the audience, as to anything you want clarified from the remarks I'm going to make. But first of all, let's just do the housekeeping. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're on Rumble or Kick or Twitch or YouTube. Subscribe or follow the account on X, and be sure to share this stream wherever and whenever you can. So what has happened in the case of Bolivia? we will attempt to explain. Tonight, though, I am trying to line up an interview with people who specialize in the coverage of Bolivia. I've followed it relatively closely since the emergence of Morales over 20 years ago now, before he was president. But I'm obviously not in the area. I'm not a Spanish speaker or a speaker of any of the Bolivian indigenous languages, of which there are many. So somebody who covers this more closely than me will obviously have more of the local knowledge. But I think there are certain lessons to be learned, and so I wanted to do this stream tonight specifically on these points. First things to say before we get into the meat of the issue is that, first of all, there is no one single route to revolution. Two, it is theoretically possible in some instances to take a country on the path to socialism without the insurrectionary overthrow of the prior existing bourgeois state, or to use the old Maoist term, or winning a protracted people's war, or going through Foucaultism or something like that. It is theoretically possible to start a transition towards socialism by winning bourgeois elections. That is something which is theoretically possible. Is it practically possible? Arguably, and the case we're looking at tonight would strongly suggest no, for a variety of reasons. That even though there are multiple ways to revolution, there are certain things that you do actually have to do to, as the party name suggests, move towards socialism. Now, just to start off with, then, so what are the things that you absolutely need to contend with? The first thing that needs to be reckoned with in any situation, doesn't matter whether this is in a country which is trying to emerge from neo-colonial domination by the United States, which is Bolivia, or other countries in Southern and Central America, or any of the imperialist nations, the class nature of the state needs to be reckoned with if you are to go forward. And that can be done in a variety of ways in theory. But the fact is that the capitalist state will remain the capitalist state unless, and here we'll get into this in more detail when we talk about the Nicaraguan and Venezuelan examples, unless you have a way to either purge it or purge the state forces, shall we say, of the bourgeois collaborators, or you can build a counterpower to the armed forces of the bourgeois state, which is what has now been done in a place like Venezuela. But needless to say, the class nature of the bourgeois state, as analyzed by Lenin, as analyzed also earlier by Marx and Engels, needs to be reckoned with and dealt with by anybody who sincerely wishes to lead his or her country in a socialist direction. And again, that can be addressed in a variety of different ways, but it needs to be addressed. Second of all, the power of the actually existing ruling class needs to be either severely curtailed, contained, or broken completely, with a preference towards breaking it completely. Again, the time scale on that and the methods that you use will, of course, vary from country to country. But break their power so you must, because if you do not, or at least put extreme limits on it, then the bourgeoisie will attempt, via their historic control of the state, or in the case of a country like Bolivia, via their connections, both within the Bolivian state, but also their external connection to US imperialism, will seek to wreak all kinds of havoc in the country until, of course, your movement collapses. And so the power of the bourgeois must be confronted and ideally broken, or at least contained, curtailed. The other point is that if you are seeking, as Morales was, to push towards his version of socialism, then it will need to be the case that you have a organized armed force of your own that is capable of contending with the armed forces of the bourgeois state, which will never be fully under your control in most circumstances, or to be able to face or discourage foreign intervention, which is what the Venezuelans are doing now by mobilizing the workers en masse to sign up to essentially a large-scale workers' militia that would be able to do a lot of damage if the US is stupid enough to do some sort of Bay of Pigs style landing in Venezuela. By the way, just so you know, I don't think that they're going to do that, because for precisely the reasons that there's no easy wars anymore, as the military commentator whose analysis is often very accurate, Will Shriver, has pointed out in posts he's written on X. But those are three things that you definitely need to deal with internally, which is the power of the bourgeois state, the need to break or constrain the power of the ruling class, and the need to build up the power of the organized working class and peasantry to be able to form a counter power, at least, to the institutions and organizations and repressive methods of the bourgeois state. And if you don't do any of those, or you don't do any one of those, or only go halfway, then the disaster that has afflicted Bolivia, starting with the overthrow of Morales in 2018, will come to you. Should also be noted at this stage that, of course, social democracy in a neo-colonial nation, a nation striving to obtain its independence, will be a different beast to that which exists in the imperial core nations. In the imperial core nations, social democracy is hopeless, purely rotten, and has long been a collaborator with the ruling class in order to suppress and destroy working class power. In the neo-colonial world, social democracy, of course, will have those elements to it. It'll have those elements to it that are just pure sellouts, that just offer the ruling class a way of manipulating the working class. But there will be those in the neo-colonial world who are reformist socialists, who are quite sincere in what they want to do. They could be quite sincerely wrong, but they're not miserable sellouts like the ones you get here. So the other point to emphasize is that bourgeois legalism is a terrible trap to get caught up in. And Morales did get caught up in that in 2017. And the consequences of that have been disastrous. So moving then to what's actually happened. What's actually happened recently is, of course, that the recent presidential election, it's now has taken place. It has now gone to a runoff after last week, August 17th. The traditional right-wing parties took first and second place. So Rodrigo Paz Pereira from the Christian Democrats won around about 32% of the vote in the first round. Jorge Quiroga from the right-wing Libre Party got around 27% of the vote. Neither of them reached the threshold necessary, which is either securing 50% of the vote or 40% with a 10-point lead to win outright. And there'll now be a runoff between two different forms of right-winger, which risks, of course, undoing all of the genuine progress that the Morales years made. It is worth just pausing to consider the progress that the Morales governments that ran from 2006 to 2018 actually made, because they did make real progress. And that can't be doubted, nor should it be disparaged. Morales' record is filled with genuine achievements on behalf of the Bolivian workers and peasants who put him where he was as president. So I'm just going to run through a few of these now to re-emphasize the points, because here's the achievements of mass in government shouldn't be neglected or forgotten. And that is, as these are as follows. So they did manage over the 12 years that Morales was president to halve the number of Bolivians living in extreme poverty, reduced income inequality by 2/3, averaged a rate of economic growth at around about 4.8%. Per capita income actually tripled by 2010. Mas and Morales nationalized the oil and gas industries, also the telecoms and electricity industry, funneling the proceeds from those industries back into reinvestment and infrastructure. On welfare, they incentivized the peasant population to send their children to school by offering payments. 2 million families benefited from that. They also brought in the first universal old age pension at the age of 60, which is better coverage than you get here now, to be honest. And also, they introduced schemes to provide better healthcare for pregnant women, so that more pregnancies were seen to term rather than lost. So genuine achievements, has to be said. In terms of indigenous rights, of course, in a country that is, depending on which figures you use, it's either like 41% to 62% indigenous or partially indigenous population. So it's the one country in South America which can claim to have over half of its population still be of indigenous descent. So he was the first indigenous president. He introduced this concept called the plurinational state, which recognized the 36 indigenous languages and granted political autonomy to the various indigenous nations inside Bolivia. Constitution also enshrined the rights of nature and increased indigenous representation at various levels of politics. He also did significant infrastructure investment, including in urban and rural roads, school building, hospital building. 4,500 educational facilities were built across Bolivia using the revenue from the oil and gas industries. Improved the cable car system in La Paz. Many rural communities gained access to paved roads, running water, and airports were built in the rural areas for the first time. Morales, that is, chased out the Drug Enforcement Agency and USAID, which is a big step forward. Getting rid of the DEA or other so-called law enforcement agencies from your country operating there for US imperialism is a huge step towards securing your sovereignty. And they also withdrew Bolivia from the International Center for Settlements of Investment Disputes in 2007. That's a World Bank body dominated by the US. So it took Bolivia out of one of the chains of neocolonial management that sort of sit around the neck of every Bolivian, and has also promoted progressive integration amongst Latin American countries. Finally, he did some land reform, redistributing 34 million acres of land to indigenous families, taking it away from the landed aristocracy and the oligarchy. So those are real and considerable achievements, and it was why Morales has this very, very deep support amongst particularly amongst the Bolivian indigenous peasantry. It's why he won the election. He won a third term. It's why the population voted for him again, and even though, of course, when he tried to claim the term that he'd won, he was couped out via the military and the police, and this was in 2018. And this is ushered in a period in Bolivian history which was a interim presidency. So he was chased out on November 10th, 2019, just to be completely accurate about this. This was following riots, so-called protests staged by the opposition. And then even though Morales won the presidential election fair and square, but the right wing refused to recognize it and staged all kinds of protests, destabilized the country. Then the military high command suggested to Morales that he would have to resign to regain control in order the state to be not in a state of civil war. And it was the police forces in Bolivia, many of their representatives joined the riots. So Morales had lost control of the state forces, essentially, and this was key to understanding his downfall the first time around. This then followed the interregnum presidency of Jeanine Áñez, who was never able to properly secure power and eventually gave way to new elections in 2020, where Mas won again, but under the leadership of Luis Arce. Arce was from the more middle class wing of Mas, not the peasant farmer wing. And this showed in that Bolivia started doing a few deals with the Biden administration, and Morales and Arce immediately or very soon afterwards fell out with each other. There was a big contest between the two of them, and it ended up with neither of them getting the nomination for Mas. The party splitting. Many peasants this time around just didn't vote at all or wrote in Morales's name. And so you end up with a split movement, Mas being essentially crippled as a party by a split that it was in many ways instigated by Luis Arce. And in the end, you end up with a bunch of demoralized supporters not voting or spoiling their ballot papers. And as a result of a split caused by the middle class, more pro-US wing, I would say, you end up with a wholly comprador government either way, headed by the same group of characters who were around the Jeanine Áñez presidency. And so this is sort of bringing things up to speed very briefly as to where things stand. Now, the question is, amongst all of this, well, where did the fall come? Is it now, or was it over 5 years ago? I would argue that Morales never managed to recover from the coup of 2019, and the reasons for that lie in the fact that they didn't do in Bolivia some of the things that have been done elsewhere in South America to secure yourself against the kind of coups that the US, we know, specializes in. And that includes, of course, if we compare things in Bolivia to Venezuela, which, of course, it is geographically and historically close to, you can see that one of the key steps that first Chavez, then Maduro took was in purging the state hierarchy, particularly the military hierarchy, getting rid of all the commanders who could be seen as pro-US, who had either been trained in the US or was close to the US, and getting rid of them and bringing in loyal officers who were sworn allegiance to the revolutionary process or the constitution as rewritten, is a crucial thing. Also, as I said earlier, the arming and organization of the peasants and workers in Venezuela to act as a point of counter power to the bourgeois state. That is absolutely crucial in securing the ability of the PSUV, which is the Bolivarian Revolutionary Party in Venezuela, to resist foreign intervention and local coups. Similar things have been done in Nicaragua. I'm not completely up to speed yet on what the process is like in Mexico, though I'll do more reading of that and come back to it in a later episode. But even with all the reforms that Morales undoubtedly carried through, there was clearly a weakness in his government that allowed the reactionaries to stage their coup in 2019, which was, of course, the failure to control the state bureaucracy and to bring the military leadership under control. I mean, there are various rumors about what happened, but one story I heard was that one of the generals who demanded Morales' resignation got straight on a plane and flew to Florida with $1 million in cash that he was given from the US Embassy. Wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, to be honest. But goes to show that if you are going to go on this route of trying to peacefully transition towards socialism, then controlling the state bureaucracy, controlling the military is absolutely crucial, as is not being able to be, not being able to be subjected to influences from US imperialism via its NGOs, etc. Morales did a decent job of kicking those out, but it seems that they still had quite an extensive operation in Bolivia, hence why they were able to stage the intervention that they did in 2019. And again, this defeat that Mas has gone through now, this is just playing out the final elements of the drama that began in 2019 with the Morales trying to get a third term and being denied that by the military, and the inability to control the military high command remains a key weakness. And again, in common with people like Rafael Correa or Lula in Brazil, like not doing anything to build an alternative power structure, not arming the workers and letting them know that the job of safeguarding the revolution is theirs because it is their revolution. Because a lot of it for Correa and Lula's cases, they didn't see themselves as waging a revolutionary struggle. Thankfully for Venezuela, US imperialism has made it absolutely clear that they are waging a revolutionary struggle and had better act accordingly. It is reported that the mass leadership under Arce thought that they could reach some kind of bargain with US imperialism. US imperialism, though, played along and did just enough to make Arce and others believe that if they just sidelined Morales, then somehow good things would be coming their way. It was never going to be the case. So the point I'm going to conclude on at this stage is that the struggle of the Bolivian peasants has been an inspiration to anybody who's watched it, and I've watched it go on and on for 20 years, longer actually, 26 years, going all the way back to the late 90s, and the anti-water privatization process in Cochabamba, and Morales' emergence shortly after that. And it was I remember it being a tremendously inspirational time because you had these various different corrupt oligarchical presidents being literally chased out of town, out of La Paz, by like angry mine workers tossing dynamite around, with angry peasants marching from the villages into the towns, confronting the riot police and winning the day ultimately because their man won as part of the old pink tide. But the pink tide retracted. Pink tide went out again. And it went out again because too many of them believed that they would be able to reform the system away, or at least reform the system to the point where it couldn't do as much damage to the working class and peasantry anymore. But to bring it back to where we began, it's clear that now that not only was it the case that before 2019, Morales and the party hadn't shackled the bourgeois state anything like enough, but also there were those inside Mas who saw taking charge of the bourgeois state as a solid means of promoting themselves, as a solid means of cashing in, as the usual like petty bourgeois opportunist way. And the fact that again Morales tried to contest this but wasn't able to get rid of Arce Arce staged that ridiculous coup plot against himself, which was never real. And you end up with a mess like this, where basically the party that is still the most popular party splits in two, and the current rulers engage in sabotage operations against their most popular leader in order that they can retain control of the remains, essentially. So the lesson that I would draw from it is that no matter how many achievements that you have, no matter how many times you think you've buried the power of the domestic reactionaries, simply because of the fact that they've been there for centuries and they have a lot of accumulated capital, they can mobilize all kinds of people against you, should they choose to do so. And of course, these people are allied with US imperialism, which is prepared to lend unlimited resources to get their hands on Bolivia's lithium resources, for instance, which is why Elon Musk once said, we'll coup whoever we want to. And so it is also the case, though, that none of this is inevitable. It's not inevitable that Bolivia, as a relatively small nation, should just be permanently dominated by the United States. That's not inevitable at all. But what's needed, as Fidel Castro once observed, what's needed is unity of the population and the party. So unity of the party, and ideological unity of the wider population with the party, in order that to reach a situation where the US staging an invasion or trying to launch some kind of internal color revolution becomes more and more difficult, because it would mean facing mass casualties, which they don't want to do. So to reach our conclusion here, this failure, and I hope it is a temporary failure, was not because Mass ran in bourgeois elections, nor even because they won them. It's because when they did win them, they fell into some of the same traps that reformists always fall into, which is not relying on the masses, thinking you've got some clever genius plan that no one will ever see coming. You often don't. And also failure to struggle against reactionary bourgeois trends more effectively. And so with all of that in mind, the failure to curtail the power of the most reactionary institutions, the failure to curtail the power of the ruling class itself, all of that means that you end up in a situation where they're able to remove you by a judicial coup and then corrupt your party from the inside with the assistance of the Americans, to the point where you aren't allowed to be their candidate anymore in the party that you helped to found. But this is what comes from trying to proceed in such a way as to not provoke some kind of internal coup, not provoke some kind of conflict with US imperialism. You end up with one anyway, because any change, any move away from just chronic neocolonial servitude is too much for US imperialism. If you try and do that, they will reach out and destroy you. Right. Going to go through the comments here to pick up on a few things. Right. Hello to Jenny, our moderator. Hello to Enigma. Hello to Victor, Anthony, Sophia, David Ball, Emily Baumgartner from Sucre, Bolivia. Well, good to have you with us. Hello to Comrade Jawad, Ogas Cybernetics, Tim Gray, Aid from Mexico City, Patrick Spackman, Peter Carmichael, Jerry, good evening to you, comrade, Bruce Albert, Slumbering Colossus, Mo1917, Yep X, Holistic Politics, Rosinanti 3003, Yuri Lipa Korpi from Fascist Finland, Paul, Miguel, what else we got? Fran Vapor. Okay. Next Q&A is on Thursday, Chandler, so bring your question along then. Be good to have you there. Right, what we got here? Hello to Seamus, Comrade Davey, Dingo Ate Me Baby, Devoltius G, Callum Roche, David King, Alda Larkin, Ben Tof from Hungary. Sophia asked, what was Morales' version of socialism? But I think the best way to put it is socialism with very Bolivian characteristics, given how much was put into preservation of the traditional Bolivian way of life. Right. Hello to Slumbering Colossus again, Dimac Fan, Rista Kostadinov, Albert Roundtree, who says there is no peaceful transition to socialism. Well, as I say, there is in theory, but not in practice. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just going to step outside and grab some water, and I'll be right back. Do stay tuned. All right, everybody, brief pause there, but we're back again now. So we have with us Ozcan, who asks, how do you think they'll try to get into Venezuela if direct invasion is ruled out? Direct invasion isn't going to work, just to confirm. The Venezuelans are too well organized and have withstood too many coup attempts to be taken in by whatever bullshit the US pulls. This whole thing with Trump sending like a flotilla down there is just a cheap intimidation tactic. They might try some kind of and stage some kind of provocation, but it's worth noting that both the Russians and the Chinese now regard the preservation of the Bolivarian Republic as very crucial to their interests. So they're not going to allow that to fall. They'll have an intelligence cooperation agreement with the Venezuelans. And I don't think there's much that Trump can do that he didn't try last time. Nor is it the case that the Venezuelan opposition is particularly united. They're not. Some of them, in fact, have been negotiating with the government of restoring relations. So that you add to that the fact that there's a mass mobilization, an armed and organized working class. The military has been purged of, as far as we can see so far, pro-US comprador figures. So you put all that together, and an invasion is highly unlikely. An invasion by sea of a few thousand US Marines isn't going to be able to conquer very much, just lead to an awful lot of casualties and an awful lot of embarrassment for Trump. What he'll do is he'll more than likely sail past, sail back there, sail those troops back again, and probably deploy them to Detroit or something. So I don't see that working. What you'll see is more sabotage, terrorism, and also like color revolution attempts, which won't work. But it'll be more of the same, basically. Evgeny Nikolaev says perhaps they'll provoke a war between Colombia and Venezuela. Probably not at the moment. I mean, there was talk in the years prior to the return of Lula in Brazil, when it was Bolsonaro, that that Bolsonaro was considering some kind of military intervention against Venezuela. It didn't happen in the end because even Bolsonaro's guys didn't really fancy that idea of getting stuck in a protracted war in Venezuela. So I don't think that's going to happen either. They'll try and encourage all kinds of things. So terrorism against key industries and infrastructure, unleashing like lumpen mobs, that kind of thing, all kinds of stuff, all of which they've tried before, and none of which will have much of an effect. It'll create some chaos, but it won't destabilize the PSUV government fundamentally. So let's just see here. Somebody's trashing Alex Jones. Well, yeah. Paul asks, where's the state of the Communist Party? Have they any presence in the country? I believe there is a Bolivian Communist Party, but I think it has historically backed Morales, but it is, as far as I can tell, relatively small. Just checking on this now. Yeah, there is one there, but it is again. There's a couple there, to be completely honest. There's one conventional Marxist-Leninist one, and there's at least one Maoist one. So God knows what the interrelations between the two are. But the fact is that the MAS is a mass working class and peasant force, or at least was. The fact that the great bulk of the population didn't vote this time round, they are essentially, by not voting, they are voting with their feet by not going to the polls, or going to the polls and spoiling the ballot paper, which is apparently the more common thing to do. So yes, in terms of the Venezuelan Communist Party, well, some of them are allied with the PSUV, and some of them have turned against it and have adopted like a more Trotskyite approach, which involves denouncing the PSUV. That would be that was more than likely under the influence of people like the KKE, the Greek Communist Party, managing to corrupt and corrode the Venezuelan party. So Ozcan says, I imagine they'll try to turn Venezuela into a Syria with dozens of CIA-backed factions fighting each other with the goal of destabilizing the country until a cartel warlord wins or color revolution. Yes, they would like to do something like that. The point here, I would turn to a point emphasized by Fidel Castro, which is that if you have the ideological unity of the nation, or at least the ideological unity of the workers and peasants, then you can hold off almost anything. Because if the vast masses are determined to fight to preserve the gains of the revolution, and it would inflict mass casualties upon the US and their stooges, then they're not really going to be wanting to be part of that action. It kind of limits their scope of action if they end up doing that. So it's an interesting question as to like what happens with regard to the various the Venezuelan communist parties. One of which now backs the Bolivarian Revolution, the other one denounces it all the time, rather confusingly. But just to go back to the point about Syria, the reason why Syria succeeded in the horrible way that it did was because you didn't have the same kind of relationship which the PSUV has with the masses, this history of mass mobilization and politicization. You didn't have that in Syria. In fact, you had the opposite, which is no mobilization and depoliticization, which is a deadly combination when you're faced with an enemy as relentless as imperialism. And this is the other point to make, which is that imperialism, of course, is a relentless enemy, and there's no let up to it. There's never any point where you can say, well, we've won this battle. Until imperialism is dead and it's a stake in its heart and its coffin is burnt, we can never know peace, because they will always be coming back and always trying it on. So we'll have to see how that works out. So, okay. So just a couple of other things before we go any further. Tomorrow, we will have out later in the evening a special discussion of on the Decline and Fall show about the book entitled Original Sin by Jake Tapper. Now, don't worry, it's not some kind of erotic novella that Jake Tapper started writing. It's the inside story of the collapsing brain of Joe Biden. And what the significance of this is when it comes to actually understanding the mechanisms which truly power the American presidency. So we're going to be doing that this week, and another regular episode of Decline and Fall later in the week. Tomorrow, we've also got part 2 of our discussion on the Prague Spring that will look at the analyses of Fidel Castro, Enver Hoxha, and the Communist Party of China. So be sure to join us for that. We also have the upcoming Q&A session, which will be on Thursday of this week. So again, be sure to join us for that. So I'm relatively brief stream tonight because I've got a ton of other things to do, but thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Your support makes all of this possible. I'll be back with you again a couple of times tomorrow. But until then, thank you for watching and listening, and I'll be back with you again very soon.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И нам